Ladies and gentlemen, we have had the very fine good fortune to catch the famous author Mark Twain on his way to the Gulf Coast. We're especially honored that Mr. Twain could be here to celebrate an early 70th birthday. Mr. Twain was born in 1835 in Florida, Missouri. In his 70 years, he has become one of the best known and most popular personalities in the world. He is the most widely read American author and also its favorite lecturer and humorist. He now lives in New York City, but he has lived and traveled all over the world. We are really fortunate that our program today fits so well into his busy schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to present to you Mr. Mark Twain.
Thank you very much, young lady, for those kind words. Oh, I do love a compliment. Well, we all do. Humorists, burglars, congressmen, all of us in the trade. But I do always hate to have my name mentioned as one of the great authors. They have such a sad habit of dying off. Chaucer is dead. Shakespeare is dead. Milton is dead. And I'm not feeling very well myself. Well, you know, as I travel around the world on the lecture circuit, I'm introduced by all manner of people. Last week it was a lawyer. I'm always just a little taken back by that. There's such an overwhelming reputation for eloquence there. And I think for that reason, we non-lawyers take just a little more pleasure when a lawyer gets taken back. I once knew a lawyer who was famous for two things: his shortness of stature and his extreme skill at cross-examination. He was only about 5 feet tall, so there wasn't really very much to him. But when he got through cross-examining a witness, why, there was virtually nothing left of the witness. More or less like the German language and a cat. Well, the Germans take a cat and start her in at the nominative singular, in good health and fair to look upon, and then sweat her through all the 4 cases. And when she finally limps out through the accusative plural, you wouldn't recognize her as the same being. Yes, sir, once a German grammar gets hold of a cat, it's goodbye, cat. Well, that's just the way that little lawyer was when it came to cross-examining a witness. When he got through with the witness, there was nothing left but a limp and defeated and withered rag, except once. Just that once, the witness did not wither. The witness was a vast Irish woman who was testifying in a rape case in which she was claiming to be the victim. She testified that she slept through the night and awoke in the morning to find the accused lying beside her. And that was when she discovered she had been outraged. Well, that little lawyer was defending the accused and cross-examining the witness. He first elaborately measured her great figure impressively with his eye and then said, "Oh, come now, madam. What an impossible miracle you're hoping to persuade this jury to believe. Why, if so preposterous a thing as that were to be taken seriously, you might even charge it against me. Come now, madam. Suppose you were to awake in the morning and find me lying beside you. What would you think?" Well, she measured him critically and at her leisure with a calm, judicious eye, and then said, "Why, I would have thought I'd had a miscarriage." Now, I hope that little story didn't offend anyone. I have nothing against miscarriages. And in fact, number several of them among my acquaintances. Well, there was a woman in Duluth who had a miscarriage once and left town shortly thereafter. And when she came back 30 years later, it was running for Congress. Now, earlier this morning, I had some doubt as to whether I would even be here. I stumbled coming into the building here and fell up against the wall and hurt my elbow. And I was standing there, well, I was leaning there, reflecting on that experience aloud. When a young man came up and asked me to take my language elsewhere. I had some trouble convincing him. You people wanted to hear what I had to say. Well, I've always thought it was dangerous to store up strong feelings. I never could quite get rid of the notion that in certain desperate and trying circumstances, profanity furnishes a relief, denied even to prayer. So, if I cannot swear in heaven, I shall not stay there. They probably won't let me in anyway, from what my friends tell me. I remember once saying to our pastor, Joe Twitchell, that I hoped to be cremated. He just looked at me and said, "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that." If I had your chances. Well, I would like a chance to see my old ancestor, Satan. Now, I have no special regard for Satan, but at least I can claim that I have no prejudice against him. Maybe I lean a little his way on account of his not having a fair show. Well, all religions issue Bibles against him and say the most injurious things about him, but we never hear his side. We have only the evidence for the prosecution, and yet we've rendered the verdict. To my mind, this is irregular. It is un-English. It is un-American. It is French. Of course, Satan does have some case that goes without saying. Maybe a poor one. That can be said about any of us. As soon as I can get at the facts, I intend to undertake his rehabilitation myself, if I can find an unpolitic publisher. Oh, we may not pay him reverence. That would not be a good idea, but we can at least respect his talents. By any man who has, for untold centuries, maintained the imposing position of spiritual head of 4/5 of the human race and political head of the whole of it, must have executive ability. And I would like to meet him. I would rather meet him and shake him by the tail than any other statesman on the planet. And I probably will. Now, when I was just a boy, I once saw a brave gentleman deride and insult a lynching mob and drive it away. For the truth is, no mob has any sand in it, in the presence of a man known to be splendidly brave. Well, these lynchings continue, and we need to ask ourselves, where should such brave men be found? If physically brave men would do, why, that'd be easy. They could be had by the cargo. But morally brave men and women who can stand up to church-going gangs of hooded murderers, don't seem to be very many morally brave people left in stock. We seem to be in a condition of profound poverty there. What we really need is some starters. But where shall we get them? Advertise? Very well then, let's advertise. Meanwhile, there's another plan. Why don't we import American missionaries from China and send them into the lynching field? Well, there are 1,511 American missionaries over there, converting 2 Chinamen apiece per annum, against an uphill birth rate of 33,000 pagans per day. Now, if we can offer our missionaries as rich a field at home at lighter expense, and quite satisfactory in the matter of danger, why shouldn't they come back and give us a trial? Why, those Chinese people are universally conceded to be honest, industrious, honorable. Why don't we give those poor things a rest, huh? Besides, every convert runs the risk of catching our civilization. We ought to think twice before we encourage a risk like that. For once civilized, China can never be uncivilized again. I've been thinking about that. Oh, kind missionary, oh, compassionate missionary, leave China. Come home and convert these Christians. Oh, what a hell of a heaven it's going to be when all those hypocrites assemble there. Well, I've been studying man and his religions for many years now. What it really boils down to is the difference in the way he interprets his deity. And that holds whether the deity is earthbound or vaporized. Well, regardless of the form of the deity, our religious leaders have always told us that they know very well what the deity is thinking. The proof of that is not good. For example, one of the early earthbound deities was the Egyptian pharaoh Epiphanes. Now here is a line of hieroglyphs from Epiphanes that for 15 years was the despair of all the scholars. After 5 years of study, Champollion translated it. Therefore let the worship of Epiphanes be maintained in all the temples, this upon pain of death. That was a 24th translation. And for a time it stood, but only for a time. And then doubts began to assail it and to undermine it. So the scholars resumed their labors. 3 more years of patient work produced 11 new translations. Among them, the one by Grunfeld was received with considerable favor, and it was this: the horse of Epiphanes shall be maintained at the public expense. This upon pain of death. Well, 7 years followed, during which 21 fresh and widely different renderings were scored, none of them quite satisfactory. But now at last came Rawlinson, the youngest of all the scholars, with a translation that was immediately and universally recognized as being the correct version. And his name became famous in a day. And the Rawlinson version was this: therefore, walk not away from the wisdom of Epiphanes, but turn and follow it. So shall it conduct thee to the temple's peace, and soften for thee the sorrows of life and the pains of death. Now here's another difficult text. It is Domotic, a style of Egyptian writing which had perished from the knowledge of all mankind 2,500 years before the Christian era. But our scholars had penetrated its secret. They were baffled, though, for 22 years and came up with 46 different versions before they finally hit upon the right one, which was this: the unconsecrated are forbidden to make foolish and irreverent speeches concerning sacred things, this privilege being restricted to the clergy. I suppose you've noticed that the human race is a curiosity. Originally, man started out just a little lower than the angels, and been getting lower and lower ever since. To place him properly, at the present time, he stands somewhere between the angels and the French. Man is really the most interesting jackass there is. It's his idea, don't you see, that the deity sits up nights to admire him. Now you may wonder why. Well, because of his intellect. Man is the reasoning animal, such is the claim. But I do think that is open to dispute. Well, I've been studying this reasoning animal for years, and I find the results to be profoundly humiliating. Well, for example, I experimented with a cat and a dog, taught them to be friends, then I put them in a cage. I introduced a rabbit. In an hour, they were friends. Then I added a fox, a goose, a squirrel, some doves, a kangaroo, and finally a monkey. They lived together in peace. Well, next I caught an Irish Catholic. And put him in the cage. And as soon as he seemed tame, I added a Presbyterian, and then a Turk from Constantinople, a Methodist from the wilds of Arkansas, a Buddhist from China, and finally a Salvation Army colonel. Why, when I came back, there wasn't a specimen left alive. These reasoning animals had disagreed on a theological detail and had carried the matter to a higher court. Because you see, man is also the religious animal. He's the only one that's got the true religion. Several of them. He loves his neighbor as himself and cuts his throat if his theology isn't straight. Why, he's made a graveyard of the globe in trying his honest best to smooth his brother's path to happiness and heaven. The other animals have no religion, you know. Going to be left out. Seems questionable taste. Man is the only patriot. He sets himself apart in his own country under his own flag and sneers at the other nations. Keeps uniformed assassins on hand at heavy expense to grab slices of other people's countries and to keep them from grabbing slices of his. With the result that there is not an acre of ground on the globe that's in possession of its rightful owners. And in the interval between campaigns, he washes the blood from his hands and works for the brotherhood of man with his mouth. man is the only animal that deals in the atrocity of war. He's the only one that for sordid wages goes forth in cold blood to exterminate his own kind. And he has a motto for this: our country, right or wrong. Any man who fails to shout it is a traitor. Only the others are patriots. Say, who is the country anyway? Is it the government? In a republic, the government is merely a servant, a temporary one. Its function is to obey orders, not originate them. Only when the republic's life is in danger should a man uphold his government when it's wrong. Otherwise, a nation has sold its honor for a phrase. And if that phrase needs help, it gets another one. Even though the war be wrong, we are in it. We must fight it out. We cannot retire without dishonor. Well, not even a burglar could have said that better. Man is the only animal that blushes, or needs to. Well, you just have to remember that man was made at the end of the week's work. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have to call a halt to these proceedings. I haven't been feeling very well lately, and in fact, last evening I thought I was coming down with the flu, and a friend recommended I drink a quart of warm whiskey every 24 hours. And then another friend recommended the same thing. That made a half a gallon. I did not come down with the flu, but I have not yet completed the remedy. So I think I'll go back to my hotel room and get to work on it. Thank you very much.